Welcome back to Panda Audiobooks. In the previous episode, Jian Wushuang shocked the Sky Mountain Academy with his unnatural speed and talent, immediately earning him the envy of his peers. Today, the jealousy turns to blood. Chapters 29 through 32 throw Wushuang into a ruthless confrontation. The established seniors and high-ranking disciples, threatened by his rise, decide to halt his progress with a coordinated assault. Wushuang must fight against overwhelming numbers and superior experience, navigating a deliberate trap designed to crush the newcomer. This is a brutal, high-stakes test that he must win alone if he wants to survive in this fiercely competitive environment. Wushuang is surrounded. The battle for respect begins now. Chapter 29 starts right away. Chapter 29. Unworthy. Xianxia, if it continues on like this, your dear disciple will be defeated, said Bai Chong with a smile. They are still fighting, and the little guy called Jian Wushuang only has a small advantage. It is too early to say that my disciple will lose, right? Xianxia said with a complacent expression as if everything was already in the bag. Then continue to watch. Bai Chong frowned and said nothing more. In the arena, eye-catching sword light flashed. Jian Meng'er had successively performed many strikes using first-class sword arts of the Sword Pavilion, which were incredibly formidable. However, Jian Wushuang not only countered her attacks, he also countered them with superior sword moves in response. The gap in swordsmanship was too large. Although Jian Meng'er had an absolute advantage when using her spiritual power, it was difficult to utilize this at the moment, as her strength could not be channeled through her attacks. Her arrogance and confidence were completely suppressed by Jian Wushuang. 2 months ago, you said that you and I were from two different worlds and that there was an insurmountable gap between us. You looked down on me. In your eyes, I was trash, a wretch that could not even gather spiritual power. Just before the start of this duel, you said again that in this fight, you would let me face complete despair due to your absolutely dominant strength. You have said so much and been so arrogant. But now, Jian Meng'er, is your strength only to this extent? Come at me with your strongest attack, or, could it be that with your current strength, you do not have the qualifications to deserve my attention? With eyes gleaming like lightning, Jian Wushuang stared at Jian Meng'er, who was embarrassed by the pressure from his swordsmanship. These harsh words which were spoken echoed throughout the whole drill ground, causing an uproar in the entire ground. Jian Meng'er clenched her white teeth tightly, and she involuntarily looked at Xianxia, who was in the stand. She sensed her gaze on her and nodded toward her slightly. Jian Meng'er immediately understood Xianxia's plan through this signal. Jian Wushuang, I know that your gift in sword principles is unique, and I never thought of fighting with you based on swordsmanship. But today, I will let you know how big the world is. You, observe closely. With a groan, an awe-inspiring righteous aura burst out of her body, while holding her sword in one hand with the sword tip pointed at Jian Wushuang. Strong and formidable sword essence spread out slowly. The sword essence was extremely vigorous, grand, and magnificent. This is... Bai Chong, who had been smiling in the stand, was surprised, and a hint of fright flashed in his eyes. Boundless Universe Sword Art, one of the 4 ultimate swords arts of the Qianyuan sword sect. Bai Chong looked at Xianxia with gloomy countenance, and coldly said, Xianxia, did you teach her the Boundless Universe Sword Art? Meng'er is my disciple. Is there anything wrong with teaching her this? Xianxia sneered. The Boundless Universe Sword Art, as one of the 4 ultimate sword arts of the Qianyuan sword sect, was an absolute peak-tier first-class sword art. Compared to the 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion, it was quite a bit stronger. It was because Jian Meng'er had cultivated this boundless heaven sword art, combined with her higher spiritual power cultivation compared to Jian Wushuang's, that Xianxia had absolute confidence in Jian Meng'er from beginning to end. This is boundless heaven sword art? There is no longer any suspense in this duel. Sichu Qingyu sighed at the side. Winner. Jian Meng'er must be the winner. Her cultivation of spiritual power is much higher than that of Jian Wushuang. Together with this top-tier first-class sword art, it is impossible for Jian Wushuang to defeat her, definitely impossible. Yi Xiu said as well. Victory. That little guy called Jian Wushuang will lose. There was a collective groan from the stands. Well done, Menge, excellent. At this moment, Jian Lan was clasping his hands full of excitement. Hearing the comments that Jian Menge would win the duel coming from the famous experts next to him, he looked ecstatic. Only Bai Chong, who stared at Shui Hanshin with a frosty gaze, coldly said, "Although Jian Menge is your disciple, after all, she has neither really entered into Chenyuan's sword sect, nor had an entry ceremony, while you have already taught her the boundless heaven sword art without authorization. Although you are an elder of Chenyuan's sword sect, and it is normal for you to have some privileges. But, to want to win only by virtue of the boundless heaven sword art? I don't think so." Oh. Shui Hanshin was surprised as she looked at Bai Chong, with a condescending expression. Jian Menge is using the boundless heaven sword art. Could there be any suspense in this duel? On the battlefield, the condition of Jian Menge had reached the peak at this moment. That vast sword essence was at an awe-inspiring stage. Such frightful sword essence indicated that the sword strike that was about to be displayed by Jian Menge would be world-shaking in power. Such strong sword essence, I didn't think that Jian Menge would have this much power. The expression of Jian Wushuang was gloomy. This sword essence is amazing. It is not from my sword Marquis mansion, so it seems that her great master taught her that. Good, I guess that makes sense. Jian Wushuang's eyes were hot. Jian Wushuang, take my strike. Remember, it is called Sword River. Jian Menge said coldly. Sword River. Jian Wushuang's eyes were fiery, and strong battle intent rose up from his heart immediately. Come on, let this attack determine the outcome. It won't let you down. The awe-inspiring aura from the body of Jian Menge had reached the ultimate limit. At this moment, she held the triple-kill sword with both hands together and raised the sword into the air. Heaven and earth seemed to pause for a moment, while the surroundings fell silent instantly. Go to hell. Finally, Jian Menge powerfully hacked down with her long sword. Swoosh! A bright and dazzling sword light burst forth, cutting through the air and leaving an eye-catching sword river flowing through the void. Gorgeous and beautiful. Anyone who saw this sword river would be completely immersed and awestruck. However, when the sword river flowed towards Jian Wushuang, he suddenly closed his eyes and thought of many unexpected scenes. All these scenes were about the time he and Jian Menge spent over the last 4 years from day to night. Once, I dreamed that I could be with you forever. We would get married and even have children. You were my closest partner, someone I truly loved. I was willing to give you everything, even my life. But now, this illusion has been broken. The next sword will determine victory or defeat, as well as completely end the relationship between you and me. With this sword, I will tell you that. Jian Wushuang opened his eyes, with a flat and cold voice resounding through the sky. There are many people who are qualified to look down on me in this world, but you are unworthy. Zip! Ice-cold sword light flashed at once. Blood Shadow, the first move of the anonymous sword arts. Chapter 30. Best in the World, the Formless Sword Arts. The two streams of sword light formed a stunningly beautiful sword river. One of the lights was majestic. The other was cold and dazzling, as well as fleeting. Both sword lights were frighteningly powerful but very different. If one would describe Jian Menge's sword river as a colossal giant, capable of overpowering anything in the world, then Jian Wushuang's sword light was akin to an omnipresent assassin, lurking in the void like a king of assassination. A colossal giant had the ability to overpower the world. As an assassin and the king of assassination, was there any need for him to compete with her? It was naturally hopeless. Swish! The fleeting sword light resurfaced once again, bypassing the long and splendid stream of Jian Menge's sword river and appearing in front of her. Before she could even react, the sword light swept over her wrist. Blood splattered and the triple-kill sword fell on the ground. Jian Wushuang was already in front of Jian Menge, the long sword in his hand pointing at her throat, stopping less than half a centimeter away from her skin. It was so close that she shivered from the coldness of the steel, her beautiful face finally turning pale for the first time. Time seemed to have come to a standstill. Everyone stared at the scene unfolding on the arena in disbelief. Has he really defeated her? Jian Menge lost. Oh my God! A thundering uproar swept the drill ground as everyone exclaimed loudly. Over on the grandstand. Impossible! Shui Hanshin was the first on her feet. She had been so confident in her disciple's victory. Changing expressions fleeted across her face. How could it be? Jian Lan was completely stunned. He could not believe what had just happened. Jian Menge, who uses the boundless heaven sword art, was defeated. The famous experts in the grandstand exchanged looks. They could see their shock reflected in each other's eyes. Earlier, they had all thought Jian Menge would win. There was no suspense in the confrontation, but the result was a slap in their faces. Anonymous sword art. Jian Wushuang used anonymous sword art. Jian Xinhong's eyes brightened. Anonymous sword art. Everyone turned to him. That's the supreme sword art of our sword Marquis Mansion. Only the masters are qualified to understand it, and only 3 sword pavilion masters have truly comprehended it. I didn't think this boy would be able to comprehend it. His father must have taught him, Jian Xinhong said excitedly. It must be his father that taught him, Jian Xinhong said excitedly. It was no wonder he was so excited. After all, anonymous sword art was so advanced that it was incredible for anyone to be able to comprehend it. What anonymous sword art? Is it even comparable to our Qianyuan sword sect's boundless heaven sword art? Asked Shui Hanshin, her expression turning cold. Shui Hanshin, you're being ignorant about this. Even if your Qianyuan sword sect's boundless heaven sword art is great, it doesn't mean there are only a few sword arts that can rival it. Take the anonymous sword art as an example. It's more powerful than the boundless heaven sword art. Bai Chong sneered, staring at Shui Hanshin. If you haven't heard of the anonymous sword art, I'm sure you know it as the formless sword art. Formless sword art? The best sword art in the world, formless sword art. Shui Hanshin was startled. You're saying what Jian Wushuang demonstrated was the formless sword art? That's right. The corners of Bai Chong's mouth lifted and he nodded. The famous formless sword art contains 9 different movements. The terrifying ones being the last 3, but they have been long lost. The middle 3 are rare and valuable. They're hard to get even if your sect is willing to pay a hefty price. The first 3 movements of the formless sword art are more common. Even a second-rate power, much weaker than your sect, could get their hands on them as long as they're willing to pay. As far as I know, the first sword Marquis Mansion Master, 200 years ago, paid a heavy price for the first 3 movements, which make up the anonymous sword art. The one Jian Wushuang used was the first move of the formless sword art, Blood Shadow. Blood Shadow. Everyone could not help recalling the move Jian Wushuang had demonstrated on the arena. The sword moved like a ghost, and when the sword edge fell there was a flicker of red. It was like a red shadow, thus the technique was named Blood Shadow. It's a terrifying technique. The famous experts in the grandstand were all amazed. Shui Hanshin, your disciple lost this battle. Bai Chong said. Shui Hanshin's expression turned steely. Lost. She really lost the battle. On the arena, Jian Wushuang's long sword remained near Jian Menge's neck. If he moved his palm even just slightly closer, he could kill her at once. Jian Wushuang, are you happy now? If you're still not satisfied, just kill me directly. She was smiling, but it was an incredibly tragic smile. He looked at her momentarily without speaking before putting down his long sword. He bent over to pick up the discarded sword on the ground and stroked the metal slowly. Triple kill sword. There was a hint of surprise in her eyes when she saw him pick up the triple kill sword. When she raised her head to look at him, cold words resounded by her ears. 2 months ago, I told you the Sword Pavilion will always belong to Sword Pavilion. It'll always belong to my father and I. Don't even dream about getting a piece of it. I'll kill anyone who tries to steal it. You only have yourself to blame for what happened today. Myself to blame. A stunned Jian Menge had become a little whiter when she heard this. Her smile was self-deprecating and her eyes were wet. Just then. You only have yourself to blame? That's a fine phrase. A majestic, booming voice reverberated throughout the drill ground unexpectedly. Everyone turned and finally noticed the cold-faced young man by Shui Hanxin's side. The young man carried a long sword and had always stood quietly beside Shui Hanxin. He had not spoken since the beginning, but his brows were now uplifted. In 2 quick steps, he came up to the arena and his voice echoed in the air. I'm Yi Mo of the Qianyuan Sword Sect. Do you dare to fight me? Chapter 31. Seize the Spirit of the World. Pang! The indifferent young man's heavy landing shook the arena and made the floor crack. Senior brother Yi Mo. Jian Meng'er looked at him. What are you doing? Junior sister. Yi Mo shot a glance at Jian Meng'er. Great Master and I are here today to see your excellent presentation for the campaign of Sword Pavilion Master. Instead, you're being humiliated on stage. As a great master, she cannot help you in respect of her status. However, as your senior brother, I cannot just stand by and watch. Yi Mo looked at Jian Wushuang again after that, and said in a deep voice, Jian Wushuang, as a man, does it give you a sense of achievement to bully a woman? A woman? Jian Wushuang could not help laughing. I couldn't tell she was a woman when she taught me an unforgettable lesson 2 months ago, that strength mattered the most in the world. Well, you're right. Yi Mo nodded, hummed in a cold voice. As you said, only strength matters in this world. But I will tell you with confidence that my junior sister, as well as the disciples of the great master, are not easy to bully. I will let you know that you are just a narrow-minded person and a contemptible scoundrel. As the voice fell, a strong spiritual power was emitted from Yi Mo. The spiritual power was much stronger than the peak profound spiritual sea realm emitted by Jian Meng'er. Exceptional spiritual sea realm. How could Yi Mo already be an expert in the exceptional spiritual sea realm? How old is he? He looks about our age. How could his cultivation of spiritual power be so high? It was already surprising that Jian Meng'er achieved the profound spiritual sea realm at 16 years old, not to mention her senior brother. The drill ground was immediately filled with exclamations. Shui Hanxin, there really are a lot of geniuses in the Qianyuan Sword Sect. Bai Chong looked at Shui Hanxin meaningfully. The reason why my Qianyuan Sword Sect is strong is that there are plenty of generations of genius disciples attracted by our rich resources that keep gathering there. Meng'er is only at the top in talent, but she is not the strongest, Shui Hanxin said. But your disciples' behavior goes a bit too far, right? The moment Jian Meng'er was defeated, he jumped out. If Jian Wushuang was defeated, would all of your top disciples in Qianyuan Sword Sect jump out to help him? Bai Chong said in a cold voice. So what? There are indeed many apprentices in my Qianyuan Sword Sect. What's more, he is also 16, the same age as Jian Wushuang. It is fair for the 2 of them to fight. Shui Hanxin said and laughed. That is different. Bai Chong shook his head and said, although they are at the same age, the cultivation they have is rather different. While your disciple gets top resources from the Qianyuan Sword Sect, including cultivation methods in swordsmanship, guidance from experts at the peak of the Gold Core realm, as well as from some stronger disciples in the Qianyuan Sword Sect. Jian Wushuang learned all this by himself. How could they be the same? Then who is to blame? It is he himself. Looking pale, Shui Hanxin shot a glance at Bai Chong and spoke in a low voice. Bai Chong, Jian Wushuang has nothing to do with you. He is from Sword Marquis Mansion, and you are the supervisor of the gladiator arena. Even the Sword Marquis Mansion Master allowed this disciple to jump out. Why are you complaining? Bai Chong, stunned, couldn't help looking at the experts from Sword Marquis Mansion. They were either elders from Red Marshal Hall or alchemists from Pill Refining Room, except for Jian Hong. But people from Sword Pavilion were not here. People from Red Marshal Hall and Pill Refining Room did not support Jian Wushuang. As for Jian Hong, he hesitated for a while. However, when he saw the cold complexion on Shui Hanxin, he swallowed his words. Because he could tell that Shui Hanxin was enraged. If he supported Jian Wushuang at this moment, he would offend an elder who had great power in Qianyuan Sword Sect, in the name of Sword Marquis Mansion. So, he chose to swallow his words. Bai Chong couldn't say anything because even people in Sword Marquis Mansion didn't support him. How could he blame an outsider? Spiritual power at the exceptional spiritual sea realm came from Yi Mo on the arena. It made the disciples from the Marquis mansion feel stressed. Exceptional spiritual sea realm. Jian Wushuang felt surprised. Exceptional spiritual sea realm is a higher level than Jian Mengus. Yi Mo became an apprentice of Xianxia a long time ago. What's more, he has been training in Qianyuan sword sect with cultivation methods and secret sword arts. His swordsmanship must be more excellent than Jian Mengus since his cultivation is much stronger. Jian Wushuang had already tried his best to defeat Jian Mengus. As for Yi Mo, he felt very unsure. However, he sensed that he had to fight with Yi Mo when he saw the icy stares of Xianxia and the complicated expressions from everyone around him. I have no right to refuse the fight, yet I never wanted to refuse. So let's begin. Jian Wushuang clasped his hands tightly, showing a little insanity in his slightly narrowed eyes. Soul-devouring. Secret skill. The void shook with insanity. Jian Wushuang's body seemed to become a dark hole capable of capturing anything. Natural power from all things of the universe came to him at a surprising speed. As the natural power poured into his body, Jian Wushuang's spirit raged. His cultivation of spiritual power was only at the peak of the 8th heaven of the divine path, almost at the profound spiritual sea realm. However, now his cultivation of spiritual power exceeded the 8th heaven of the divine path into the 9th heaven of the divine path. At the same time, a piercing pain made Jian Wushuang's face contort. Finally, when this soul-devouring secret skill reached the peak, the pain in his body reached its peak too. His cultivation of spiritual power promoted to the 9th heaven of the divine path at that moment. Grinding his teeth tightly, Jian Wushuang's face contorted. The moment he raised his head, a light filled the void. Jian Wushuang spoke with great arrogance and obstination that resounded in the people's hearts. You are Yi Mo from Qianyuan sword sect, right? If you need to be convinced, then I will convince you with my fists. Chapter 32. Sword-killing movement. Bang! Jian Wushuang sparked spiritual power that could match the exceptional spiritual sea realm. Applying the soul-devouring secret skill, his cultivation immediately reached the peak of the 9th heaven of the divine path. His present spiritual power could almost match the profound spiritual sea realm. Because of the advantages of the heavenly creation skill, the peak of the 9th heaven of the divine path had nearly the same power as the peak of the exceptional spiritual sea realm for normal warriors. What happened here? How did his spiritual power become so strong? All those present were in awe. They were wondering how Jian Wushuang had become so strong all of a sudden. However, if they looked under the floor, they would find that all the creatures within 100 meters of Jian Wushuang had died. What? He is actually retaining his strength. Jian Mengus, who had retreated to the drill ground, trembled with fright when he saw the aggressive figure from behind. Jian Wushuang's look changed completely. His ruthless eyes were fastened on Yi Mo. He was aware that using the soul-devouring secret skill did great harm to his body, and the pain in his body would grow with each passing minute. He had to end this fight as quickly as possible. Kill! Jian Wushuang's sword, and the long sword turned into a ghastly force. Ping! Sword light shone, cold and glaring. It was still the first move of the anonymous sword art, Blood Shadow. Jian Wushuang defeated Jian Mengus in a single move. The extraordinary speed of the sword art amazed everyone, and the present speed was obviously faster because of Jian Wushuang's growing cultivation. It's too fast to think about. Yi Mo hummed with remarkable noble spirit, and a magnificent sword light appeared. What Yi Mo used was the Boundless Heaven sword art. But Yi Mo used the Boundless Heaven sword art in a much more flexible manner than Jian Mengus. This was because Jian Mengus had just begun to train in the Boundless Heaven sword art. Yi Mo grew up studying the sword art in the Qianyuan sword sect. They obviously had a different level of understanding towards the sword art. It was still a fight between the giant of heaven and earth and the king of assassination. However, Jian Wushuang's first move, Blood Shadow, met the magnificent sword light instead of going around it, causing these two strong forces to erupt. It was apparent that the advantage of Jian Wushuang's first move, Blood Shadow, was its amazing speed. but it still fell behind the boundless heaven sword art in terms of strength and power. After the collision of these two swords, the cold and shining sword light darkened quickly with the overwhelming crush following. It didn't work. Jian Wushuang was disappointed. The advantage of your sword art lies in the speed, but it lacks in strength. My junior sister has been practicing the boundless heaven sword art for only a short time, thus she didn't have a deep understanding of it. This caused her defeat. I am much better. Yi Mo's look was ruthless, and he said in a low voice, Jian Wushuang, you must think your sword art is very swift, yes? I will show you what real speed is. Yi Mo turned into a flowing light as soon as he finished his words. Whoa! Yi Mo appeared in front of Jian Wushuang swiftly with his sword light. Both the body and the sword were like flowing light. How fast! It is so fast! A large group of disciples in a marquis's mansion were astonished. This is one of the 4 ultimate sword arts of the Qianyuan sword sect, flowing light sword art. It is famous for its speed. Bai Chong was marveled in the stand. The 4 ultimate sword arts of the Qianyuan sword sect were all first-class sword arts, so once each of them was practiced to a certain degree, they would be extremely terrifying. As for the flowing light sword art, its advantage was speed. It was so fast that the sword light became many shadows and twisted in the air. It looked like it was being swept by the sword light. Jian Wushuang's expression was very serious. When Yi Mo's sword art came toward him, he used Aurora sword art first. Speed was extremely important in the Aurora sword art, and Jian Wushuang had mastered it. The sword art was extremely fast when it was used. Clang! 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 Numerous consecutive clashes could be heard, but it was obvious that Yi Mo's flowing light sword art was faster. Although Jian Wushuang tried his best, Aurora sword art was only a first-class sword art, while the flowing light sword art was a supreme sword art. It was even known as an ultimate sword art in the Qianyuan sword sect, which mainly studied sword principle. There was a big gap between the level of these two sword arts, so even though Jian Wushuang had mastered the Aurora sword art, he still could not gain an advantage. In the arena, Jian Wushuang was forced to retreat continuously. Then suddenly, a fierce chop instead of the usual sword jab came towards Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang immediately noticed. He raised his long sword naturally, meeting the fierce sword shadow with his body sinking slightly, and then he retreated very quickly. Jian Wushuang, your swordsmanship is not so great. Yi Mo glared at Jian Wushuang ruthlessly. If your strength is like this, then the battle is over. Just as Yi Mo finished speaking, a strong sword essence suddenly burst from him. He moved the long sword in his hand slowly. With this move, a huge dim shadow with a height of over 10 meters appeared from behind. The long sword was moving with Yi Mo. Finally, the sword art had matured. Boundless Heaven's sword art, legendary maneuver. Yi Mo slashed suddenly with the long sword in his hand. The enormous sword shadow was also wavering. This sword seemed to be able to split the world in half. The strong power left the crowd breathless. The horrible sword essence could destroy nearly everything. All the people on the drill ground were amazed. Not good. Bai Chong was in the arena. His expression became serious and the spiritual power appeared in his hands. He was ready to save Jian Wushuang. However, he became hesitant as soon as he saw Jian Wushuang's expression. Jian Wushuang's expression was very subtle, with hints of seriousness and surprise, but mostly excitement. Is he going to use the 11th move? Jian Wushuang stared at the strong sword light coming toward him. At this moment, a deep awareness of crisis sprang up from the bottom of his heart. He thought about how this sword could cut him into 2 pieces. But this unprecedented life or death crisis made him feel something. In this moment of life or death, he became calmer and closed his eyes. Is this it? Is it like this? I finally understand what it was that prevented me from using this style. It is the ruthlessness for killing. If the sword is for killing, how could I lack the ruthlessness for killing? Jian Wushuang opened his eyes, an onrush of excitement flashed before his eyes, and he waved the triple kill sword. It was the 2nd move of the anonymous sword art, sword killing movement. And with that incredible demonstration of skill and the total defeat of his rivals, we conclude Chapter 32. Wushuang has shattered the internal power structure of the academy and proven that his genius cannot be suppressed. The arrogant seniors have been put in their place, and Wushuang stands unchallenged among his peers, securing valuable resources and reputation in the process. The elders can no longer ignore him. His path is now clear to access the academy's true hidden treasures. Join us next time for chapters 33, 34, 35, and 36, as Wushuang steps into a secret training ground or a restricted library, uncovering powerful techniques and secrets that will propel him to the next stage of his cultivation. Thank you for listening to Panda Audiobooks. If you loved watching Wushuang dismantle his rivals, please subscribe and hit that notification bell.